So that's actually what we had our students practice. We administered the expanded attributional style questionnaires to them. And then we had them literally practice writing down, picking adverse events that had happened to them within the last month, to write down what they thought the cause of that was, and then just to practice the idea of writing down alternative ideas. And again, as with all of these interventions, the idea is for them to continue to practice them on their own to sort of make them a habit. Okay. The fourth intervention we did just this Tuesday, and it was along the lines of accepting pain. So the idea, we evolved to feel pain. Pain is actually a very important function in our lives. It keeps us safe from harm. We are hardwired to avoid pain. The problem is that a lot of the time when we avoid pain, we cause ourselves more grief and more suffering and interfere with goal achievement more than is good for us. There's this notion that if we could accept pain, if we could allow ourselves to experience, say, social anxiety, we would be better able to behave in a way that gets us our goals. So if our goal is, say, to find someone to date, we're horribly shy, terribly afraid of rejection, those painful feelings actually prevent us from taking the action that will help us achieve our goal, which is to ask out someone we're interested in. This notion, this new therapy is called acceptance and commitment therapy, where people actually identify their goals and then figure out what are the tasks that they need to accomplish to achieve those goals, and further, what are the feelings that they feel when they even contemplate, doing these tasks that prevent them from doing the tasks. It was interesting this Tuesday when we actually had students do this. So we actually had them identify a situation that causes them painful emotions. Actually, we started with a goal, and they would identify the steps they would have to take to achieve that goal and the emotions that would rise up. Every single student said, just doing the exercise made them feel those painful emotions. Just contemplating doing these things caused them pain. But they were really excited about this idea, which to most of them I think was quite novel, that rather than unconsciously avoid those things, which is what most of them do, what most of us do, that they could actually become aware of the fact that what was preventing them from taking on these tasks was not that the tasks were impossible, but that the amount of psychic pain that they would bring into their lives was so great that they would just unconsciously push away from actually undertaking it. And the idea that they could actually say to themselves, I will accept this pain, I will allow myself to feel it, was, for some of them, a revelation that, I can actually, it's true, I'm not going to die from feeling anxiety, but if I can actually allow myself to feel this anxiety, look at what I can actually accomplish. So what we haven't done yet are these last two interventions, which I just described briefly, which is, one is let go. And the idea here is that no matter how much grit we have, no matter how good we are at understanding adverse events, there are going to be some goals that we're going to have that we're not going to be able to achieve no matter what we do. And there are going to be some attachments that we have that we're going to lose no matter what. This is actually a very core Buddhist idea. Everything is temporary. None of our attachments are permanent, despite the fact we feel they are and we want them to be. We will all lose function at some point. We will all lose people at some point. And yet it seems as though the grieving process is contingent upon our ability to let go of those attachments in our hearts, because we cling to them long after we've actually lost the thing that we're attached to. And in fact, in some studies, people who have experienced great trauma, say the death of a child or some other loved one, what they found is that most people will continue to go back in their minds and try to mentally undo those events and think of how they might not have lost that person. If only I had turned left going to work instead of right, I wouldn't have been in that car accident, and my daughter would not have died in that car accident. The problem with undoing things is that it's been shown to prolong the grieving process. It extends the amount of anxiety and depression that people experience. But where we really talked, or plan to talk to students about how you let go is the difference between what's called sense making and benefit finding. As I said earlier in the talk, we are all meaning-seeking creatures. We are driven to explain things to ourselves all the time. In fact, studies have suggested 80% of people, when something bad happens and a tragedy strikes, they ask themselves, why me? But only 50% of them actually ever find a convincing reason. And so this is sense-making. Why did this happen? That's what our minds lead to. But it turns out, doing that puts us at greater risk for perpetuating their grief and extending depression and anxiety, and lends no benefit. Here's a study that suggests this is true. Of 124 parents who lost a child to SIDS, and these parents were interviewed 3 times, 2 to 4 weeks after the baby died, 3 months after the baby died, and then 18 months after the baby died. And you can see on the y-axis is the mean adjustment score. It's a scale they use to sort of talk about the degree to which they're feeling the things on the x-axis. The SCL-90R is a symptom checklist that measures depression and somatization, meaning how many physical symptoms arise from emotional disturbance. What you can see is in the group that was not searching for meaning and didn't find meaning, that their risk of depression and somatization was the lowest of all the 3. That their level of well-being was the highest, that their anxiety and their sadness and their anger was the lowest. It was about equal to those people who were searching for meaning and found it. But the key measure is people who were searching for meaning but didn't find it. And it turned out that the difference in each of these measures was statistically significant. They had greater anxiety, greater sadness, less well-being. So the take-home point here is that when tragedy strikes, if you look to make sense out of it, there is no greater advantage to doing that than to not doing it at all. But there's a greater risk. The risk is if you can't find meaning, you're at risk for feeling worse and having a prolonged reaction to it. And I'm going to skip this one in the interest of time and talk about the last cognitive intervention, which is appreciate the good. So numerous studies have documented the beneficial value of gratitude, of the experience of gratitude. Basically, there's a theory called broaden and build theory of emotion, which is that positive emotion itself from any cause actually makes us more resilient. The idea is, and there's data to support this, that when we feel good, we develop skills, cognitive skills, ways of thinking about things that outlast the good mood and serve to make us more resilient in the future. Well, it turns out that gratitude is second only to love in its ability to make us feel good. So there's very little controversy about the value of having a grateful life. Where the challenge comes in is, how do you muster gratitude? What do you do? Because habituation occurs to thoughts, just as the way it does to experiences. And so the more you call to mind things for which you think you should be grateful, and in fact are grateful, the less that emotion of gratitude will be stimulated. We get used to things. And so one researcher actually wondered, well, maybe the problem is that because we habituate to the things for which we want to be grateful, we could generate a feeling of gratitude by imagining how those things never might have happened. And so a study was done where they actually had one group sort of do the traditional gratitude list thing, and the other group actually write down things for which they're grateful, but then document stories how they might not have gotten those things, sort of the near miss. And it turned out those people were able to generate far more gratitude and far more consistently generate gratitude than people who just do gratitude lists. So our idea for this intervention is to have students list things for which they feel grateful from one of these following categories, which we took actually from that study. And then actually write down how they may never have happened. Or, from another study, write down how they might lose those things. Vividly imagine how they'll lose those things to see what effect that has on their ability to summon up gratitude and therefore to be resilient. Okay. So that's our program. And except for the last two, we've already done them. And there are many lessons to be learned and practical considerations, but I just want to share with you the initial data that we got. And keep in mind, the goal of this pilot was not necessarily to demonstrate there's a difference, but really to sort of figure out how we can make this work and how we can do it. But this is what we found so far. So here's the changes in the PQH-9 scores, which is for depression, and the GAD-7 scores for anxiety. What we found is that the depression scores really did not change significantly, but the anxiety scores did. So they started out feeling pretty anxious, and then there was a dip, and then it turned out a non-statistically significant rise, and then another dip. And then what looks like from the second dip, a statistically significant rise, but still, compared to the beginning, a statistically significant difference in the mean there. And it turns out, I'm not going to show this data, but it turns out when we do regression analysis, it actually correlates with the increase in resilience. Because here's basically how the baseline scores changed. And the GRID score basically did not change appreciably, has not yet changed appreciably, but the resilience score here I put it, I called it adversity. This is the kind of data that's in place. It actually did. There was an initial rise by about 0.6 standard deviations that then has been maintained throughout. Now, we're just now beginning to get in with them. You know, they were exposed to these things. Their qualitative feedback about what we're doing is really positive. But we've already started to hear suggestions about one of the biggest problems they're having is remembering and actually using them. And so our thinking is that if we can find ways to get them to really incorporate these methods into their lives, that we're going to start to see more of a difference in grit and a bigger difference in resilience that we're hoping is going to be sustained. And so we're now at the stage where we're actually starting to brainstorm about how we can train them to not just hear about these things in practice and nuance, but actually continue doing them. So we've got about 15 minutes, so I thought I'd do a stop there and be happy to entertain any questions. Thanks so much for your attention.
Hello, my name is Walker Gonzo. I work in undergraduate education here. I just have a question. I'm sorry, I was a little bit late, so you might have to review some of the demographics before you began, but I was just interested in knowing from the students who participated, just what type of demographics were they coming with, and I'm particularly interested in knowing like people who are committed or devoted to their religion, if that has any effect on this, and also students who are either ethnic minorities or first generation students.
Right. So we didn't actually query them on religious affiliation, and we didn't officially get the demographics on their minority students. The English College is a very diverse student body. So there, as I look around the room, we have it's a diverse group. There are many Asians. There's African Americans, Indians. Again, it's only 16 kids, but it's a relatively diverse group. And there are some. We have a couple first years. And we have every year, all undergraduates, not graduates, for this pilot study, and they're all represent all the years.
Were there gender differences?
You know, we haven't analyzed that yet, so we'll look at that and see. And again, because the N in the study is so low, I don't know that we're going to have the power in this study to figure that out. Our goal is, once we've learned from this, and see the difference, we're going to actually expand this to probably 80 students next year and introduce a control group, and that's when we can start getting at some of these questions to see how this breaks down. It was interestingly, I didn't mention this, but in the study of the self-esteem study from the Helper program, it turned out that only made a difference for boys. It didn't help girls. And of course, these were pre-adolescents. The thinking was they tend to have theory is at that age that there will be greater self-esteem issues to begin with that weren't necessarily responsible. So it's an important question for us. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it doesn't matter if people self-select to do these things or if they're essentially required or forced to do it.
In that study, yes.
Are you doing anything around that? You know, the students that you're working with, are they self-selecting or did you sort of pick it up at, say, the year?
Right. We debated about that. And we're not as interested in answering the question if people are forced to do this, does this work? We really want people who wanted to embrace this. So we deliberately self-selected people. We advertised sort of like by trying to tempt them into this is a way to develop your resilience. We wanted people who were interested in that topic. Yeah.
I know you have 16 people that you evaluated. What is your sense of picking 2 other people that are not part of the 16? I'm assuming maybe your wife, and then maybe somebody who is always in a crossfire with gunshots, and they're in a bathtub avoiding, gunshots in the neighborhood.
So
How would they? I mean, what is your sense of how they might do on this resilience project?
My sense is that my wife would score very highly, and that the person who is perhaps even suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder would score very low, and actually there's some literature on that as well. And I think the underlying assumption in your question is that these interventions are not going to work equally well for everybody.
I'm asking.
I think that's true. I think that's, and we debated a lot about at the beginning, should we screen people who have emotional issues? Or should we exclude people who are depressed or anxious? And we decided not to do that because we wanted to see what effect it would have on them as well. When we found that some people sort of met those criteria, we actually encouraged them to go to counseling to sort of have that issue dealt with. But I think that people, when you look at the literature, people who are suffering from PTSD, for example, they score far lower. Some people, and conditioned professional athletes score far higher. They have much higher pain tolerance, for example.
That's